Hi, grammar and writing students, and today we are looking at forms of comparison for adjectives. If you are using the 8th grade Rod and Staff book, we will be on page 419. So let's get started by taking a look at the gray box on this page. And as you know, the gray box always gives us the bullet points that we're going to need for the lesson. So I always tell the story as I talk about forms of comparison for adjectives. I always ask students if they have ever been a part of a superlative contest. And what I mean by that is where you're maybe chosen as the best at something. And so when I was in high school, and I don't know if they still do this, when you were a part of the senior class, they would always choose like 20 or 25 different things, like the most athletic, the best musician, the fastest runner, the most academic. And so it would be out of all of the senior members of the class. And so I was fortunate enough to be chosen as the most musical and the most academic, and I also received a math award. I'm pretty good at math, but I love grammar and writing too. So the whole point of that, it's usually silly, and who really cares? But I always usually go around the class and we identify something that everybody in the class is really good at. So think about what you might be chosen as the best at something. So anyway, there are several ways that we can compare people. And the superlative we'll talk about in a minute, but that's the one, where I was the best musician. So there's 3 different degrees in how we compare people. The first degree is the simplest form. It's just one person. So if there's only one person in a contest, they obviously are the ones that are going to get the award. So that's the positive degree. That would be like one tree. If I looked at a tree and said, that tree is tall. Tall is the positive simple form. So one tree, it's tall. Then if I look at the comparative degree, I am comparing 2. So if you just think compare, you're comparing 2 things. So maybe 2 trees are in my backyard, and I would compare those, and I might point to the tree on the right and say that is the taller of the 2 trees. That is made by adding ER. And then finally, the superlative degree is where I would look at 3 or more trees and I would say that one on the right is the tallest, and I add EST to it. Now, the other things that are pointed out here in the gray box, some adjectives have irregular forms. Welcome to the English language. When you compare only 2 people or things, be especially careful to use the comparative, the ER, for just 2 people. Do not use more and most with an adjective that is already in its form of comparison. So don't add more and most unnecessarily. And then an adjective that expresses an absolute quantity cannot logically have degrees of comparison. We'll look at that. So let's take a look at what all this means. So here's the 3 categories, the 3 degrees: positive, comparative, superlative. On a test, I would ask you, give me the 3 degrees, and you would tell me positive, comparative, superlative. If I asked for an example, you could use any of these. So if I happen to be talking about the last few nights and how dark it seemed outside, maybe the moon hasn't been shining, or maybe it's been very cloudy, I might say, last night was dark. Very simplest form. But if I'm comparing tonight and last night, I might say, last night was the darker of the last two. But then if I'm talking about a whole week, it's been really dark this whole week. I think tonight is the darkest night of all because I'm talking about a whole week. So that's how you make these changes in the form or the degrees. Now, sometimes there is not an ER and EST, like for content. Or actually, let's use glorious. I like that one better. We would not say gloriouser or gloriousest. It's just too much. And so somebody early on decided that more and most would go with those words instead of adding ER and EST and making it very awkward to say. Same thing with content. Contenter or contentest. Those would just not make sense. That's where we add the words more and most. Okay, one thing just to caution you of, and this is in your book, if you look at page 420, about halfway down, talking about littlest. Littlest is a word, and that's used to indicate size, so the littlest girl. But if we're talking about amount of something, like maybe how much milk is in each of the containers in the refrigerator because we didn't use it all up at once, we might say that carton on the right has the least amount. We wouldn't say the littlest amount of milk. So be careful with those two words. Take a look at that in your book on page 420. All right, let me give you some examples. I was getting pretty creative in the video world, so I have put up a tree. One tree in my backyard. The tall tree. It's the only one. And it's tall. The tall tree. And I literally only have one tree in my backyard. However, outside of my fence, there is another tree. But my tree is still the taller tree out of the two. My tree's the taller, and that one outside of my fence is not. Then, if I were to look across my road, there's a whole bunch of trees. And mine is still the tallest out of all of those trees. And there's probably, 6, 7, or 8 of them. And mine is still the tallest. So we'll assume this one's mine. And I can make it tallest. So there we go. It is the tallest of the 3 trees. Then, I love kittens. So here is a beautiful kitten. And we could even say a cute kitten. And then if I added another one, we would have to decide what is the more beautiful kitten. So here's where we're using more and most. And I wouldn't say the beautifuler or the beautifulest. So if we're looking at these two kittens, this one has some really incredible eyes. I still think, whoops, didn't mean to move that. Still think this one is the more beautiful of these two. But then let's take a look at a third kitten. Now we have to decide the most beautiful kitten. So this is just like those superlatives that I was talking about earlier when I was in high school. They had to decide who was the most musical. And I happened to be the person they chose. So we have to choose the most beautiful. Remember, it's 3 or more. I think I would still choose this guy right here, the little orange cat. I think that cat is the most beautiful of the 3. All right, so let's look at some of our irregular adjectives that or adjectives that have irregular forms of comparison. So here's a few examples. When we have the word good, like if somebody asks you how you're doing, you will either say well or good. But if I were to ask you how you were doing today in comparison with yesterday, you would not say gooder or weller. You would say better. And then if I would ask you, well, how are you feeling today compared to the whole week? You might tell me that today has been your best day. Same thing for bad and ill. We don't say we're badder or iller. we say were worse or worst. Far does make a little bit more sense, but we add the th in there, so far, farther, farthest. Then we have much and many, and instead of saying mucher or muchest, we would use more or most. And then little we've already talked about. This is the amount, little, less, least. But when you're talking about the size of something, you can use littlest and littler. All right, let's take a look at some examples and then we will do the class practice. So sometimes the easiest thing, and it points this out at, trying to figure out what page you're going to find this on. Either 420 or I think it's on 420. The most common mistake in using the forms of comparison is to use the superlative form. So using the est. So here's an example. Grandpa Weaver is the oldest of my grandfathers. Well, most people only have two. Some people have more because of family situations. But instead, we're going to assume there are two. Grandpa Weaver is the older of my grandfathers because there's generally only two. Then, which of the twins picked up the most apples? Well, twins means two, so it would not mean a third one. So we would say, which of the twins picked up more apples? The next point is do not use more or most with an adjective that already has a form of comparison. So smaller is already comparing two things, so we don't need to add more. I chose the more smaller puppy. That was the most warmest day. Instead, it would be I chose the smaller puppy, and that was the warmest day. Now, children that are really young, you will often hear them add more and most as they're learning the grammar of the English language through their parents. So, you can take, there's a couple of other examples on page 421, so feel free to take a look at those. All right, let's take a look at the class practice. If you don't have your book opened, it is on 422. And I'd like for you to hit pause, and I would like for you to go through each of these sentences and make the corrections where you see fit. And then when we come back, I will actually read, we'll read the sentences and I'll give you the corrections. So hit pause and then come back when you are ready. Okay, if you're back, then we are ready to go through the class practice. So the first one, although Lot recognized the God of Abraham, he was the least faithful of the two men. And it should be that he was the less faithful. Least is three or more. Of Isaac's two sons, Jacob was the youngest. Well, there's two here. And therefore, we must use the er. Of Isaac's two sons, Jacob was the younger. A man of faith can be more calmer in adversity than an unbeliever. So we're going to take out more there, and we're going to say a man of faith can be calmer in adversity. Then number 4, Josiah was a gooder king than his grandfather Manasseh. Well, we know that good is not going to have an er or est, so we're going to say better. Josiah was a better king. Number 5, Samson had greater physical strength than any man. So if we're talking about all the men in the world, then we have to use the est. Samson had the greatest strength. They also give an option in the answer book to change this to Samson had greater physical strength than any other man. And by putting other in, it makes it the category of one. So you can actually change that into two different things. Samson had the greater strength, or the greatest strength of any man, or Samson had greater physical strength than any other man. That one's a little confusing. That's one of those situations where I usually tell kids to rewrite, fix the wording. The next one, the play area at the new school is more square than the one at the old school. It should be the play area at the new school is more nearly square than the one at the old school. So sometimes you have to add an adverb in there to help it make sense. Nearly is the one that you almost always add. Number 7, the longest of the 2 routes is the most scenic. Since it's just 2 routes, it would be the more scenic. The Nile is longer than any river in the world. Well, we can do 2 things again like that other one. The Nile is the longest river than any in the world. We could say that. Or we could say the Nile is longer than any other river, and it makes it like 2 categories there. Again, it's a whole wording change for the sentence. Then number 9, of Misty's 5 kittens, I prefer the one with the lightest fur. Oh, excuse me, I read that wrong. The lighter fur, it should be changed to lightest, so I'd already corrected. Sorry about that. Then Conrad thinks the black one is more prettier. So here it should be Conrad thinks the black one is prettier or prettiest, because we don't know. We don't know if there's just one kitten or dog. So that way it's kind of up to you. So hopefully these examples show you what you can expect in your homework. And remember, you can add that adverb nearly when you have most or more, and that clarifies it. And then in some of them, it's just a whole wording change to make sure that your sentence is clear. So that's all I have for you on the forms of comparison for adjectives. And I hope this helps you understand the material, and I will plan to see you on Wednesday. Sorry about that. Have a good afternoon.